So, Jim, good to see you. How you doing?
Good seeing you, Michael. It's been a well, actually, it hasn't been that long, but good to see you again. Always ready to hit some more fun Star Trek talk here.
I'm cherished that a week apart from you makes it seem like an eternity to you.
Oh man, I tell you, this is one of the highlights. Doing the recordings with you is a highlight, and then honestly, watching the recordings when they're available, when you finally put them available, because I know you're so excited to make them available for people to watch, and you finally get them up there on social media and stuff, and then I get to watch them, and it's great for me because like there's pockets of my time during the day when I'm not busy working on my day job or I'm not working on this, where I can like kind of sit back with a snack and watch STA TV and just like listen to you and listen to the other folks on our show and either this show and just refresh my memory about what we were talking about and just how exciting this is. Because like honestly, it's a lot of work, but I just enjoy this part of it so much, just talking to you and then talking to the fans out there, because like these books are cool, and I hope that they resonate with people. And like now that Modiphius, actually by the time this thing hits social media, it'll be out for a while, but Modiphius just recently opened up their own Discord server, and we've already got like 1,400 people on it after like a week. So like there's just this huge response of people, which is super cool. And now even more fans are in like one location where we can talk to them, and it's great to see everything that's happening. So it's a good time to be involved here.
No, and I'm figuring if we're talking about it, we might as well record it. And then it's funny how many other people chime in and really help us enhance the game. For those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, this is Continuing Conversations, which is a podcast, video cast about everything Star Trek Adventures. My name is Michael Dismuke. I'm with Continuing Missions, which is the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures. And we also have Jim Johnson. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and lead editor for the Star Trek Adventures line by Modiphius.
Yeah. And so we're always talking about cool things. And I was talking to Jim earlier that, I love the books. I know PDFs are cool, but I like hard copies. And the way I attack the books when I get them is I read through them and then I look through just the art. But then there's something I did, and then I read it together with the art and look at all the little sidebars. But there's something I did recently after the Player's Guide and the Game Master's Guide came out. And I said, did they design this into the other books? And what I did is I read all of the chapter quotes that begin at each chapter, because each quote is tailored to the theme of the chapter. And I know we designed that into the Player's Guide and the Game Master's Guide. And it was super fun looking through hundreds of thousands of words to find the right quote. But then I said, wait, did they do this with the other books? And you did. And I didn't notice it till these two books. I mean, what's your take? That was awesome.
I will tell you a little secret. That is one of the weird little pleasures I get out of this gig is that because I'm the line editor and the project manager, I'm usually the last set of eyes on these things before they go to approvals and before they go to layout, and getting those chapter headings right in my head is one of those perverse little fun things that I like to do. And so I spend a lot of time. I've got the TV queued up nearby so I can watch episodes and like go through and find that piece of dialogue. There's a couple of really good transcription sites. I don't rely on the transcriptions. I always go to the source material to make sure I get it right. But finding the right quote is so much fun. And sometimes, the writers are great because you usually provide your own. Or you at least provide suggestions, but sometimes they're too long or sometimes they don't quite fit or whatever. So I get to massage them a little bit, but
well, you got me into this whole obsession now. I'm looking at that. And then also now when I'm watching shows, because all Trekkies rewatch our shows many times. Now I'm like, ooh, that'd be a good one. And I'm starting to write them down. So
Yep. I've got my phone with me every time I'm watching an episode, and every time I hear a piece of dialogue, it's like, oh wait, I'm going to go back and listen to that again, and then I'll write it down. It's like, oh, that's going to be a great quote if I can find a place for it in a book somewhere.
Well, that is a perfect segue to what we're talking about in today's episode of Continuing Conversations, because we are focusing all about those characters, what they say, but also what they do. We are in chapter 5, page 137 of the Player's Guide. I'm going to, just because we were talking about, read the opening quote from Captain Christopher Pike, which I think sums up the theme of character roles well. He said, "Sometimes we know the rule we're meant to play. Sometimes we don't. I'm not sure which is better, to be honest." I thought that was a great quote from this chapter. And so go ahead and lay it out for us, high level, Jim, why the character rules chapter in the Player's Guide.
Yeah, so this chapter, Al Spader did the majority of the work on this chapter after giving him some guidance, and he did a great job with this. I think the idea is in the Starfleet core rule book and the Tricorder Digest, and then the Klingon core rule book. Between those two books, we provide 12 different character roles that a player character can be, whether it's the commanding officer, first officer, engineer, surgeon, medical officer, whatever. Hitting the key archetypes that you see on all the TV series, right? And so this chapter is meant to be a deeper dive into those character roles, because like in the core books, it's really just a paragraph. It tells you what the role is and it gives a role benefit, right? And so now we're actually going into a deeper dive here. So if you are a new player to Star Trek Adventures and even Star Trek, and you're like, well, what can I do? What do I want to do? You can think about like, what kind of a player are you? Just like, in kind of the meta, what kind of a player are you? What do you like to do? What are your strengths? What do you bring to a game in general? Like, are you a leader type? Are you a follower type? Are you a support type of character? Are you a tank? Are you the fix-it, the one who gets into the technobabble and the science and stuff? So this is kind of a guide to like help you think about what character roles would work for you, and then also just to give you more details on that particular role so that you can more effectively role play it.
Yeah, and let's jump into it. I mean, I think it's great. I know, when I play, or if I'm playing an NPC, I found it really cool to read this and find a nuance, because based on your role, it's going to change your personality and how you play the game. I think about how we're at work. You go from being a frontline worker, and then all of a sudden you're managing 2 people, and then you're managing 100 people. There's some changes in that dynamics. And I thought this was a perfectly laid out chapter to kind of talk about that. Sometimes we've spoken about it before, when you're a commanding officer, which we're going to start talking about, page 140, is that, how do you find that balance between giving orders but not micromanaging your players? And it really broke it down in this chapter about how to unite the crew. You're a team leader, you're a chief collaborator in that sense. And I also like the piece about keeping a log. What's the history of logs in Star Trek, Jim? For someone who's just picking up this Player's Guide, maybe never watched a Star Trek before, give us a brief on what the captain's log is all about.
Well, I mean, the vast majority of Star Trek episodes open up with a captain's log. That's what they did, especially in the original series, and that was really kind of designed to help set the stage, right? So in a role-playing context, the game master can use a captain's log or a personal log or whatever to kind of like help set up the inciting incident. Like, how does the episode open up? Either there's something happening or there's some sort of situation or whatever. You can hand that log to your character and say, okay, tweak the language to make it fit your character, and then speak it out in your character voice, and then that kind of like starts the episode. 9 times out of 10, it's usually the character talking about some horrible thing that's happening, and then immediately you're into the drama. It's like in media res, right? You're immediately into the drama and the adventure and the excitement. Sometimes it's a character piece, right? Sometimes it's just a little subtle thing about a character or their backstory, or maybe it's even a subplot that's going to sneak its way into the episode that you can start dropping in those little subplots and stuff that are always so great for RPGs.
I highly suggest, if you're new to it and not too familiar with the Star Trek genre, go to Memory Alpha, type in Captain's Log, and they actually have pages of captain's logs pooled from the episodes, and you get a flavor. They're all across the gamut of flavor, from we've just finished the tournament of tennis on Zartan 3, and I'm happy to see my mother coming on board. I mean, that's just an example, and that sets the scene, like, and act. So there's a lot there. Like you said, I use them to set the scene for my actors or my players as they're going in. And then we also talk about Ready Room. I want to highlight it again. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but I have to say the Ready Room, this chapter Al wrote, complemented the Game Master's Guide, which talked about, to be a collaborative game, giving everybody a chance to speak with ideas before just commanding through the decision. And that's, again, another trope, a common trope in Star Trek is let's hear what everyone has to say. You kind of go around the bridge, hands it back to the captain, and then he makes a decision. So I thought, again, for this chapter, there's some real good tips on how to role play this one role commanding officer. Anything else about it that you like to highlight?
Yeah, so this will help give you some advice and insights into being a commanding officer, whether you want to play a captain or a first officer. I think this first chapter here about commanding officer really helps make the argument that your commanding officer should be a player character, because I think there is such great potential things to do as a player. If you are the commanding officer, you get to lead. I mean, yeah, you get to lead people and you get to make decisions, but there's just a lot of cool stuff to do if you are a supportive leader as opposed to like being a commanding leader, right? There's so much role-playing opportunity to be a commanding officer. So I encourage you to try it at least once. Don't let the captain be wasted on a supporting character or an NPC, because it's just so much potential there to play with.
Yeah, I'm going to actually do a share screen. I know people who are listening to the audio podcast aren't going to be able to see it, so we'll describe it. But I want to screen share a facet of each one of these role designs. And this one here is showing, again, we started there, with commanding officer and some of the tips on how to play it. But what I really liked and I want to highlight are these two boxes that are in every single role. Quick build. So it talks to you how to tailor your character. If you're going to play a commanding officer, some likely ways that it affects your attributes. And then it also talks about some talents that you could pick up that would make sense for a character like that. For those of you who were watching a couple weeks ago when we filmed our session 0, you saw this a little bit in action. We tried to exemplify it. So you can go back and watch episode 9 of Continuing Conversations. I love the choose this role if, because we all have different personalities and tendencies. And Al did a really good job laying out, hey, if you're this kind of person, you may want to play this role. And I thought these two boxes, Jim, were just really, really awesome. And again, they're synonymous through each, or it's the same thing through each one of the roles.
Yeah. And I'll just add that, for gamers that are familiar with other RPGs out there, the quick build box that we included in here, that is very specifically not how to min-max this character. In Star Trek Adventures, there's really no way to min-max your characters. I mean, it's a different type of rule set compared to other games out there. So don't look at this as like, oh, this is going to be the ultimate, OP commanding officer kind of thing. It's like, this is just suggestions to get you started. And like, if you just need to make a character quick and you're on your way, follow the suggestions, certainly. But once you get familiar with the game, then you can start getting more flexible and get more creative. So this is just giving you a starting point, I think. And yes, I agree with you that Al did a great job on these.
Yeah, good point. Let's move on then to the executive officer. Now, this helps me. I had to research this when I started getting into Star Trek. What's the difference between a commanding officer and the executive officer?
So the commanding officer is the big cheese, right? They're in charge of the ship. They're responsible for executing Starfleet's mission, right? The Starfleet gives the ship and the commanding officer a job or a thing to do, and it's the commanding officer's responsibility to make sure that they go do it. It is the first officer's job to make sure that the crew in the ship is capable of following the commanding officer's commands. In addition, the 99 times out of 100, the executive officer is also a commanding officer in training. So the expectation is that eventually that executive officer is going to get a command of their own, and you just continue that cycle of promotion and getting new officers out there into the world, because Starfleet's always building new ships, and new ships always need captains.
I have to say too, out of all the Star Trek series, I think that William Riker makes the definitive case for what an executive officer was doing. I remember I used to be a kid watching that show, and I'd be like, Dad, like, why is he giving orders? Well, Patrick Stewart's character stepped back, Captain Picard, because he knew that Will Riker, who we know passed up several promotions in Starfleet, according to the genre, he was totally capable of commanding a starship. And this allowed the captain to kind of pull back and let the executive officer, talk orders. Talking about shields up, fire weapons, scan the planet. I like the executive officer in this game because you like you said, it's an officer in training, and the captain can trust them to make command decisions, even if they're sitting on the bridge themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought it was really nice. I'll had actually a subheading in here called "The Bridge is Yours." So, so if you have two people who want to be captain, Rochambeau for it and make one the executive officer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. The one thing I wanted to note, in addition to all that great stuff, is the executive officer is really, really fun. And this is going to be kind of the challenge. This is the challenge I had for Al. Is like, Al, I want you to write all these character role chapters, but I want you to make sure that everyone that's written is like, this is the best role to play because of this. This is the best role to play. So like, they're all great roles, right? But the neat thing about executive officer, and I've been an executive officer before in various Star Trek games, is the incredible amount of role playing potential that is built into the character by virtue of the fact that as the executive officer, you are responsible for all the crew evaluations on the ship, right? So it's not the captain. The captain's not in charge of the crew necessarily. He commands the ship. Or he or she, excuse me. So the executive officer though gets to do all the crew evaluations, which is just role play scene potential ad infinitum. Right. This is the way you can introduce supporting characters, NPCs. You can have interactions with all the other bridge crew and all the other senior staff, because the executive officer plus the department heads will be the ones doing the crew evaluations. And I've taken advantage of that as a game master to do no shortage of scenes to just drop into an episode and even to start some subplots and to start some little B stories and C stories. There's just so much great potential there that I hope you don't waste it or don't miss it.
To your point, on our ship, our second officer, the other crew members who are dying to get promotions really try to goal for promotion. I mean, they approach her and they like, hey, so-and-so on my department needs a promotion. And she's not one to give out promotions. And so I purposely did that so that I don't want to say they're kissing up to her, but it becomes a subject of when people are like, I really want to be a lieutenant commander. I want to promote this person. And it's been a fun scene, some HR scenes, as you would say. And so the executive officer has a lot of power there. Now, the executive officer is also called the first officer. With that said, let's segue to the third section in chapter 5, second officer and third officer. So the first officer we know is the executive officer, the captain's right-hand person. What's the second officer and third officer all about?
Yeah, so because both the Player's Guide and the Game Master Guide were written specifically to complement either the Starfleet core rulebook or the Klingon core rulebook, right? They're applicable in both. The roles in those two core books are slightly different just by virtue of the difference between the Klingon Defense Force and Starfleet. So in the Klingon core book, the second officer and third officer is a role that you can pick, whereas they're not really in the Starfleet book, but there's no reason you couldn't, because Starfleet ships certainly have a second officer. They might have a third officer, but it's not really called third officer. It's up to the captain to make up their command hierarchy and decide who's going to be in charge when the captain's not around or the first officer is not around. So in this case, second officer is like, okay, so if something happens to the captain, something happens to the first officer, you're next. You're the second officer or the third officer or whatever, and you have different responsibilities. But again, like in Starfleet, the expectation is if you've been assigned, or if you're the second officer or third officer, the expectation is you are going to be a first officer eventually, and then you are going to be a commanding officer eventually. Now, of course, in the Klingons, right, they have a slightly different way of managing promotions. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the ultimate in bloody succession plan.
Yeah.
I want to rewind a little bit too, because I have to say there's one other big benefit to being the executive officer or first officer. According to Starfleet regulations, you are supposed to be the one leading away missions, and the captain's supposed to stay on the ship for his safety. So that becomes an interesting dynamic in playing too.
Depending on which area you're playing in, yeah. But it's a great dynamic. It always tends to create interesting little scenes, especially early on in a campaign when the captain player and the first officer player are kind of like feeling each other out, trying to get a sense of where the command, how's the whole dynamic going to work. And I've seen some really good scenes, built around that aspect.
I played an introverted captain in one of the games, and she actually prefers to stay on board the ship drinking wine. So she's always more than happy. And it kind of like, well, you really don't want to go? No, I've done my bit for King and Country. I got this position because I went on enough away missions. So she's very comfortable chilling.
Nice.
Listen to jazz music. Okay, cool. So now let's move on to the operations officer. I think it's helpful while we're talking about this, maybe to call some of them out, Jim. So when I think of an operations officer, of course, Miles O'Brien is the number one. I mean, he's the jack of all trade of Star Trek, of course. So he was operations officer on DS9. I think about one of my favorite characters in Star Trek is Garrett Wang, playing Harry Kim, in the ever immortal Ensign Harry Kim. Those are operations officers. So how would you describe it if someone says, what does an operations officer do for a job?
Yeah, I mean, it could potentially sound boring. Like the ops manager, you're like the head logistics person on the ship. You are in charge of making sure that all the different teams have the stuff they need. Like if a science team needs a sensor palette, or if a engineering team needs resources, or just whatever, right? You are managing that whole logistical challenge of making sure everybody on the ship has everything they need. And if a conflict arises, you're able to allocate, resources or defuse the situation and make it work. So Data was the operations officer on Next Gen, in addition to probably being the science officer, just because he was Data. So it's theoretically, it's a lot of paper pushing in a way. Like you're just managing resources. You're a project man. You're the Uber project manager on the ship. And what this means, though, from a role-playing perspective, is that you have an opportunity to interact with like all the department heads and a lot of NPCs. So you can do a lot of dynamic stuff. You could be an engineer, you could be a scientist, in addition to the stuff that you're doing as ops manager. So it gives you an opportunity to do a lot of stuff. You can stay on the ship, or you can go on an away team. There's a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, I think the way I've seen the operations manager played in the different Star Trek genres too is this person knows the ship. Mm-hmm. They know the ship like the back of their hand, and they really are good backup, if not replacement, for the engineer also. Yeah. And that's kind of what you see happen on the Star Trek. I love operations manager. At my job, I do project management and time management training. And so when I look through these, I'm like, yeah, I'd probably end up an operations manager if I was on a starship. It seems like that's what I do.
Yeah. Like I don't remember if I'll put it in here. I don't see it specifically called out, but like if you're the type of person who really likes creating efficiencies, this is the role for you, right?
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, power allocation, all those things that are necessary on a ship, and really recommending to the captain and the executive best use of power and resources, shuttles, all that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff our operations manager does in my game. Yep. All right, then of course the ever popular chief engineer role. What's the first name that pops in your mind, Jim, when I say chief engineer?
Montgomery Scott, number one. You can't. I mean, there's some great engineers out there, but I think Scotty's the pinnacle.
Yeah, he takes the cake. And so, trying to encapsulate what the job of a chief engineer is in the 22nd, 23rd, 24th century is hard. So how would you what do you think of the highlights in this chapter for the person wanting to play the chief engineer?
I mean, the key is that the chief engineering officer is responsible for the upkeep of the ship. So where the executive officer might be responsible for making sure that the personnel are ready to roll. Like the engineers, if the ship ain't working, it's their fault, right? Everything comes to them. So it's everything too. It's like it's all the weapon, it's all the gear, it's all the shuttles, it's all the escape pods, it's the ship. Like everything technical related ultimately goes through the chief engineer and their team. So it's a lot of responsibility, because you got to have that ship ready to go when the captain says we need warp power yesterday.
Yeah,
you need it.
These people are masters at kit bashing, jury rigging, retrofitting, reverse engineering. And so if you're a geek who loves the techno babble of Star Trek, this is definitely one you want to jump into, a role. Yeah. And again, you have the best descriptions here of how to do it. One of the things I liked was the cross-training aspect that Al puts in here, is that, an engineer in the future isn't just with wrenches and hammer. This person has to know quantum theory and warp sciences. So it still gives you that chance to dive into sciences. And what I like, one of the biggest things I like about Star Trek is when they do what's called biomimetics, and they look at nature and how nature figures stuff out. And then they reverse engineer that into a scientific, mechanical, electromechanical solution. So if you're big into nature, I actually encourage people who are into that to go for chief engineer too, because it's like, okay, can you reverse engineer use biomimetics to improve your ship?
Yeah. Stamets is a great example of that, right? Stamets is a scientist, but he's also an engineer. So it's like that beautiful blend. And I don't know what your experience is like, Michael, but like in, I don't know, almost every single Star Trek game I've run or played in, the engineer and the science officer were the two most frequently involved in like almost every plot, right? Because like there's always in Star Trek, there's always some new scientific thing to figure out, or some new gizmo that is or artifact that's discovered that you have to figure out how to take it apart and fix it, or how does it work and all that stuff. And so your engineer and your science officer are probably going to be two of the most busy characters on the show more often than not.
Hey, it's a science fiction game, so what do you expect? It's going to be their way, right?
Exactly.
That's the genre. All right. But for those of you who aren't into the technobabble and just like to punch people, we have the chief of security or weapons officer. So what were your highlights from this chapter?
Yeah, so this is your Worf, your Tasha Yar, your Malcolm. These are the ones that are their job is to be the protectors, right? They're there to keep the rest of the crew safe and out of harm's way. So whether they're on the ship using the pew pew and the shields, or they're on the planet with the phasers and the defensive maneuvers and whatever, your primary job is, it's not so much law enforcement, it's keeping your people safe.
I want to highlight for those of you who still end up as a chief of security officer, but don't want the pew pew. There's a lot of opportunities. For instance, on our vessel, we have people who are specialists in security and encryption. So they're protecting the crew and the ship from computer threats, and they have some fantastic stories around that. There's even people who are more psychologists, but they're in chief of security because they're there for the psychological warfare that's going on. That could be a chief of security who's maybe involved in interrogating and stuff. And then there's also a lot of other security that's not pew-pew, like force fields or running the brig on a starship. And we have characters like that step forward that are just, again, it's all about keeping their force field specialists. So there's a lot still variety with chief of security. It doesn't have to be all rock'em sock'em.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Cool. All right, let's move on to what's probably the second or third most famous job in Star Trek, made so by Hank McCoy, the chief medical officer. People may thought it was a boring job, but I think the original series shows it is not. So what do you like most about this chapter?
Hank McCoy. I'm lost on Hank McCoy.
Henry McCoy. Oh,
Henry McCoy?
I just went X-Men on you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. You're talking about Leonard H. McCoy.
Sorry, I went totally Star Trek on that. I mean, Marvel Comics on that one. And it's okay for me to do that because they had a crossover comic where they even looked at each other and had that quizzical moment.
Oh, nice.
It's okay. I did that. Sorry.
Yes, anyway, yeah, Michael, you're absolutely right. Chief Medical Officer, great role for a player to take on because, just like the chief engineer and the chief scientist, there's always something out there in space trying to kill you or hurt you or change your genes into something weird or some sort of anomaly, or not anomaly, but some sort of weird biological disease of some sort. So the CMO is there. So if the chief security is keeping you safe, the CMO is there to keep you alive. So whether it's a toothache, something mundane like a toothache, or a shoulder knocked out of socket, like O'Brien happens to them all the time. The CMO is the one who keeps you alive. And the one interesting aspect of the chief medical officer that I love, and I just haven't had the opportunity to see it much in a game because I haven't really had that many CMOs who are really good at what they were doing, is that the chief medical officer is the only person on the ship who can declare the captain unfit for command. And that creates all kinds of cool opportunities for stuff to happen, which is why I really encourage people to play the commanding officer as a player character, because you've got this opportunity to do more stuff with it.
Not only that, which has happened, we're 49, as of recording this, we're in on 49 games of Star Trek Adventures, my group. Fantastic. So we've had a lot of things. And so that's happened a lot where the CMO is checking out the captain and checking out their emotional stability during certain situations. Yep. But another thing I see a lot on Facebook and Discord, the question comes up like, oh, I'm having trouble engaging the chief medical officer. We can't use them all the time. And I don't understand that, because on ours, if they're going on an away mission, you don't know what you're going to meet on the planet. You want a medic there for every away mission. In addition, a lot of the medical officers may have psychology or biology in the background, which means they can go explore and survey a new planet, new conditions. When things explode on the ship, they're the first one on site to be in the middle of the action. While all the action's happening, they're still in the room. Right. So I know our chief medical officer is never bored. And then with biology and psychiatry, and they even have psionics, they always have something to do. So I find this character equal to a scientist or engineer if you really think about how often you want a medic by your side in space, right?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Okay, cool. I think this would probably be, everyone's, again, top 3 type of character to choose. Science officer, who do you think of right away, Jim?
It's hard to think of anybody except Spock right off the bat. But I think Spock personifies science officer better than, really anyone else. I think Discovery's got some characters who are really good at science, like you got Burnham and Tilly and Stamets, who are all super sciencey, which is great because that's what you need in the science fiction shows, right? Is smart scientists. But I think Spock really set the bar, right? And everyone else is like looking to that because he was all over the place with science. And so you're the science officer. You are the primary problem solver on the ship. I think more than anybody else. Like you, especially if you're multi-talented with a little bit of engineering, a little bit of medical, you're going to be involved in literally every plot, probably.
And we know there's as many avenues of science as there are stars in the heavens. And so a scientist can look, I think Spock was more the analytical person. He came out as the more analytical scientist. But then we know that there's specialists in every field. I think about Dax on Deep Space Nine. She had a wealth of knowledge that she applied from all her lifetimes. And then we see on Voyager the blessing of 7 and 9 when she came on, and she was just she had the whole Borg collective science manual at her behest. And so these are great characters to play. And even if you only like fish, or if you only like the science of making wine, you could do that. You could just focus in on the science and have your work with your game master to create games where you get a chance to show off your skills.
For sure.
So really love it. There was also an addendum here about the scientific method on page 159. We know that was a controversial subject in the core rulebook. Some people were wondering how to quite utilize it. And here it goes in and talks about when to use scientific method as an extended task or a gated challenge. What's your take on this box and what it enhances for the game?
I think it just provides more advice and more ideas on how to use the scientific method. And especially if you're the science officer, don't be afraid to have your character get into some theoretical research and to be willing to work with your game master to create this whole research project that could take multiple sessions or multiple episodes to work out over the course of a campaign, right? Like if you have a pet project or if you're trying to discover something critical, be willing to jump into the scientific method, be willing to be wrong, because that's the whole point of the scientific method, right? Is to ask questions, get feedback, ask more questions, get feedback, and then keep working your way toward a solution. So
in gaming terms, I know we've started using, after this came out, I reworked how I thought of the scientific method, and people are loving it on my group. But then I thought, well, have I seen this in action on TV shows? And yes, I came up with a couple, like the discovery of the Bajoran wormhole. That scientific method of what really are the wormhole aliens was 7 seasons of action right there. And then by the end, you get some revelation on it, or Voyager trying to get home. But I see it a lot in Discovery. Discovery, you see them using the scientific method a lot as they go around the room as engineers and scientists talking about the network, the mushroom network, the mitochondrial network. Did I pronounce that right? And so you see it in action where they're not actually coming out with a result or building a weapon or something like that, but they're getting a better understanding of the sciences they're dealing with. And so treat it like that. And this book gives some great advice for scientists who want to theorize all day for solutions. All right. Popular role now, flight controller, helm officer.
Yeah. So, pretty much what it says on the box, right? You're the pilot. And I don't mean to sound negative. It's like the pilot is critical, right? If you're in a starship in space, someone's got to fly the thing. And there is no shortage of things that lethal things that you could end up accidentally crashing into or getting sucked into or getting involved with. There's all kinds of anomalies and black holes and gravitational wells. And the list goes on, right? We could come up with stuff all day long in technobabble, much less real science. And someone's got to do the flying. So whether you're, the best example, well, not the best example, the first example that comes to mind, of course, is Sulu. Although I think more recent pilots have been more dynamic by virtue of the special effects. I think Detmer is probably my number 2, because there was a revolving door of con officers on Next Generation. DS9, everybody was a competent pilot, so that wasn't that big of a deal. And then Voyager, of course, was Paris. But I think Detmer just has had the opportunity to do more dynamic things on her show, including doing a donut, right? So doing a donut in a starship is like, that was such a great line that Tilly delivered. And then they executed it, and the special effects just look great. So,
and I want to say too, if you really don't want a character who is least likely to be micromanaged, it's this character. And the reason why is because when you're in a firefight, you can't turn around and look to the captain for directions every single round. You really got to be like in ours. Our captain is like, get us out of here. That's the only order. And the person gets to really be independent and come up with creative solutions with the character. So this is, like you see, for lack of a better character when it comes to piloting, Han Solo, these people are literally flying on the seat of their pants, and they're quick. And there's a personality that seems to come with helm officers, I notice, which is a little bit more not averse to risk,
Yeah, exactly. And I just encourage people to know that, the flight controller / helms officer, it's not just about flying the starship, right? You also tend to be one of the best pilots on the ship, which means you probably get to pilot the shuttles when you're going on away teams or landing parties or something. So that immediately gives you an opportunity to get off the bridge and go to where the action is going. So that's one thing is, don't be afraid to be the chief, to be the flight controller. The other thing is that the command source book goes into this a little bit more detail. The flight controller type of character tends to be really well cross-trained. So you probably got some engineering skills. You probably got some science, especially like in astro navigation and astrometrics and like knowing where things are spatially compared to each other so that you can plot courses. And that'll just make you a more rounded character. And I think
there's also the propulsion. They also have the core rulebook says they can, if they have con, you can use con instead of engineering for propulsion related tasks too. Yeah. So if the warp engine goes down, the engineer's not ready, that con officer can go back there and work a warp engine, which I thought was really cool, using con because a pilot knows their ship, which is really, I thought that was really cool.
Yep.
All right, cool. Now let's talk ship's counselor, something that didn't come up till the Next Generation. This was a new introduced character. I know why I like this character on my ship. Why do you, if you've played a counselor on your ship?
I like it because it gives the command staff, especially the captain, another set of perspectives to look at. Right now, of course, Troy was amazing because she was a Betazoid and a counselor, so that was just a great 1-2 bonus for the captain and the crew to give that extra amount of insight. But a counselor, you're just providing more information to you're able to gather more information from a different perspective because you're hitting the more of the soft skills, the psychology, and that kind of thing, and you're not looking at it so much tactically or that kind of stuff. So I think it's just and you're also not necessarily a doctor. You're not a surgeon or a fix-it man or a fix-it woman or whatever. You're getting a different mental kind of angle to things.
Yeah, and that goes to one of the subtitles here is respected advisor. I know that I enjoy seeing that our ship's counselor makes a safe space for people when they're in an uncomfortable situation to talk their feelings out. And oftentimes it's these cool conversations that the ship counselor is having one-on-one with the captain or other characters.
Yeah,
that is helping the other characters bloom. I think we've talked about it before, that if you really want to enhance your own role play, be interested in the other characters. And so the ship counselor will find a lull in the action and be like, hey, can I talk to you for a moment? What are you feeling right now? And they're the only character that can get people to let their guards down because of the trust that you get in a counseling session. So to me, I've really enjoyed having a counselor on our ship because people walk out of that conversation with a different perspective almost every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Troy, of course, is the prime example. But if you're watching Discovery, I think in the last last season or so, I think Culber has really come into his own. They've really written him as a strong counselor, and I think that's done his character a world of good. He's just given him so much more depth and more cool stuff to do. And like those conversations he has with the characters, those are like literally pulled right out of RPG episodes that I've run, where the counselor or the doctor will have those intense one-on-one conversations. Well, not necessarily intense, but like have these meaningful, personal one-on-one conversations, just like you were saying, to really get at the character. Like, what are you struggling with? What are you doing well? What's happening? And you don't see that a lot in a lot of RPGs, where it's not important what you're feeling. It's just, what are you doing, right? But with Star Trek, it's just a whole different depth that you can bring to it, and the counselor type can really help facilitate that.
I think we may need to have we're going to have to film a whole other episode just about ship's counselors. And I'll have to pull from actual conversations that happened on our team just to talk about, because I think people may not choose this thinking it's boring, but it's not. It's really not boring at all. Not to mention that the counselor oftentimes is a diplomatic aid to the captain. So if the captain is doing a lot of negotiations, or there is a first contact situation, normally the counselor is there. So that's another enhancement to the character. All right, next one. Let's go to communications officer. Name drop. First one we all think of.
Uhura, of course.
The best of the best. Yeah.
Best of the best. Why settle for anything less, right? So communication officer, especially in the original series, actually Enterprise and the original series. Hoshi was no slouch either. This is you're in charge of communications. Of course, space being what it is, there's all kinds of radio frequencies, wavelengths, EM spectrum stuff that makes noise. And of course, every species is not human, has its own language and way of communicating. And you're on the front lines of trying to suss out what is it they're trying to communicate, right? So I think the Kelvin versus the movies really expanded on her as a character, and how good she is at what she does. She has a superpower almost to it. And then we're going to see a lot of her in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We get to get a whole new depth to that character. It's important to understand that in some ships and in some shows, there doesn't seem to be a communications officer because it's wrapped into another role. I know for an Intrepid class ship like Star Trek Voyager, it seems that operations handled communications many times. It went between them and tactical. So understand that you can still combine this into some of the other roles, making one of your engineers or science officers a communications specialist also. Yep. Or depending on what your crew composition is and what kind of game your group wants to play, maybe you're playing like a xenolinguist or xenoanthropologist or something, and like your ship is going to do this thing specifically, and you are the person on the ship who's responsible for the code, not the code breaking, but maybe you are on a season-long mission to decode some ancient artifacty thingy, and you're the point person, right? You're the one with the skills and the knowledge to. Yep. You're probably a polyglot, right? So you know a lot of language. Anyway,
exactly. It's not. None of these are boring. It's fun looking into this. And again, the choose this role if section on page 168 gives you a bunch of examples if you want to be a communications officer. Now, I think I don't know why, but I have a feeling this is like your favorite new role. And when we're about to talk ship's cook, you have so much pleasure since the Klingon book on this one. What is that?
It was such a joy to put this in the Klingon core rule book, because who would expect the ship's cook to be in there? But they're so important to the Klingons, right? Because fresh food is really important for the warrior mentality, right? And so, of course, the ship's cook is a critical role on a Klingon ship, and maybe to a lesser extent a Starfleet ship. Although I would say Archer talked about chef all the time, and I think
Neelix on Voyager.
And Neelix on Voyager, of course, yeah, because I don't remember what general said it, but an army moves on its stomach, right? So if you keep your people well fed and happy, then they're going to be more productive and effective, and so that's what the ship cook is all about. And this just provides some ideas on playing it. It's not a typical character role, but there's just a ton of RP potential built into here, because especially I love the role ability, right? The fact that you can help everybody be better by providing a good meal.
Well, just so you know, this chapter inspired an entire episode for my game, which is hilarious, where they actually had to gain respect from an alien culture by outcooking them.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it was brilliant. I mean, the way that everyone mixed their attributes and disciplines, and I made them, you had to write up the flair, and if it impressed me, you got points. It was a really, really good episode. Aaron Paulier played a Tellarite. His character is a Tellarite science officer. His wife is Tellarite also, but she's also a fantastic cook. So she was asked by the captain to take the lead in the competition, and it was a beautifully written episode.
Nice. Fantastic.
Yeah, so good inspiration. Again, this book has little tidbits that keep me going, keep all of our fans going. We want to give our thank yous as we wrap up this chapter. Next chapter is going to be about character creation options. That's going to be brilliant to talk about next week. I want to do a shout out. I get a shout out, and I have you close it out with your shout out. I asked people to let me know their most loved brick and mortar shops around the planet. The last time we did this, we had as far as Japan. Now we have one as far as Germany. And so Jan Hendrik Kalush talks about Atlantis Spiel in Hamburg, Germany as their favorite brick and mortar shop. So this is a shout out to them. Hopefully they get to see this. Everyone give a def clap for Atlantis Spiel in Hamburg, Germany. So thank you again, all the fans of the show, of Star Trek Adventures and this show too. What about you, Jim?
Oh man, there's so many people to thank, and I know we thanked a lot of them on this show. Who do I want to thank this time? I want to thank the social media team at Modifius, all the different people involved: Sean, April, John, everybody else for keeping the word out and getting the blog posts out and the social media posts and getting Twitter going, our new Discord server going, this official forums, all that stuff. You'll see more from them in the coming months and years, hopefully. Trying to get that connection between the company and the fans, and I think they're continuing to do a great job. Also, our customer service people constantly on the front lines of getting people their stuff and trying to address problems and questions. And where's my stuff? Where's my orders? Can I get a refund? Please don't. Whatever your problem is, reach out to customer service because they're super helpful. So that's my shout out for the people working hard.
All right, then we'll see you next week when we talk about character creation options. Until then, IDIC.
Live long and prosper.
All right.
You're getting the double guns tonight. Be well, Michael. See you next time.